Hi, I'm Tim Gaffney. I'm the author of Dayton Beer, The History of Brewing in the Miami Valley. I'm making this video because we're in the midst of the pandemic of 2020. I was scheduled to give a book talk for the Miamisburg Historical Society, my hometown, but they've had to close for a while. So I thought I'd try making this virtual book talk that you can watch from home. And while I'm at it, I can include information and materials about Miamisburg's early brewers that I wasn't able to fit into my book. If you're watching from outside the area, Miamisburg is a city in the Miami Valley of Ohio between Dayton and Cincinnati along the Great Miami River. It's known as the Star City, and it has two brew pubs with similar names: Star City Brewing, which is where I get this background from, and the Lucky Star Brewery and Cantina. They both occupy historic buildings just a block apart on South 2nd Street. And the way brew pubs like these are using historic buildings and local culture to connect us with our past and connect us with our community is what got me interested in the history of local brewing. Miamisburg is famous, probably most famous, for the large Adena mound that sits atop a hill overlooking the city. That mound reminds us that people have been living in the Miami Valley since ancient times. Europeans began trickling into the region in the 1700s. The trickle became a flood after the Continental Congress passed the Northwest Ordinance in 1787. Just a decade later, Zachariah Hull brought his family from Virginia and built Hull Station on the east bank of the Miami River, just opposite the mouth of Bear Creek. More settlers followed, and in 1811, Daniel Gebhardt built the Gebhardt Tavern, which is now a museum in downtown Miamisburg. And in 1818, Miamisburg officially became a town. Miamisburg's early residents saw some tough times. In 1832, a terrible flood swept down the river, causing destruction all the way to Cincinnati. Just a year later, a cholera epidemic ravaged villages across the region, and the financial panic of 1837 triggered a depression that lasted for years. But Miamisburg got through those hard times. In fact, it prospered. By 1837, the Ohio Gazetteer and Traveler's Guide found it to be, quote, a pleasant post town and beautifully situated on the Miami River. The Miami and Erie Canal and a state road connected Miamisburg with Ohio and Cincinnati. Its booming population, largely German, had more than doubled from 382 at the start of the decade. And Miamisburg was humming with business and industry. Here are just a few of the activities the Gazetteer counted: one cotton factory, one iron foundry, one brass foundry, two grist mills, one sawmill, 10 stores, 2 churches, 2 schoolhouses, 3 taverns, and 1 brewery. And did I mention its population was largely German? Now, this was the earliest reference I've found to a brewery in Miamisburg. It might have had one well before then. After all, Dayton had a brewery by 1810. But about that 1837 brewery, where was it, and who was its brewer? Early records didn't offer any clues. And records back then were pretty sparse. For example, the census of 1840 had almost no details about the residents of Miami Township and none at all about their occupations. The earliest land record I found was from 1848, when David and Catherine Hoover sold Lot 215 to John Schwartztrauber. Now, Lot 215 was a small parcel on the west bank of the Miami and Erie Canal in the first block north of Market Street. This 1851 map marks the location. It was the spot where the Miamisburg Civic Center stands today. Now, deed transfer records describe the land, but not necessarily what was sitting on it. This deed transfer, though, specifically mentioned a brewery. It says Lot 215 was, quote, known as the brewery lot. Was it the site of the 1837 brewery? The records aren't clear about that. What about David Hoover? Was he the mystery brewer? Later records describe him as the owner of an iron foundry. What's curious was that in 1848, Lot 215 was sold and resold 3 times in the space of just a few months. By the end of 1848, it was in the hands of a Charles Schroeder. Here's the most curious part. The 1850 census shows someone with a name very similar to Schroeder's living next to a Fred Hoover. I was able to identify Fred Hoover as David Hoover's father. Now the name similar to Schroeder isn't clear, but what is clear is his occupation, brewer. And another 1850 census record, this one was an industrial census, clearly identifies Charles Schroeder as a brewer. Did he have some ongoing relationship with the Hoovers? Again, it's just not clear. These records about Schroeder are the earliest ones I have found that named a brewer in Miamisburg. He also appears in later records, including Riley's 1853 Ohio State Business Directory. Schroeder didn't own the brewery for many years. He sold it in 1853 to William and Jacob Wentz. I couldn't find out much about them, not even how they were related to each other. But at some point, they went their separate ways to Illinois and Tennessee. And in 1871, they sold the lot to a Simon Hewitt. Now, the deed transfers may tell a story about the rise and fall of this brewery in the middle of the 19th century. Schwartztrapper paid just $100 for it in 1848. Schroeder, in turn, sold it for $4,500 in 1853. And yet the Wentzes, when they sold it to Hewitt in 1871, got only $1,050. What happened to the brewery during those years, and what caused the value of Lot 215 to climb and then decline? Was there even a brewery on the lot by the time the Wentzes sold it? The map of Miamisburg in the 1875 Montgomery County Atlas labels that lot as a coal yard. So by 1875, anyway, the brewery that had stood where the Civic Center stands today was no longer there. But that's not the end of the story about Miamisburg's early breweries. In part 2, I'll tell you about another brewery that stood just a few blocks from this one. In the meantime, you can order Dayton Beer from Amazon.com, either in print or download the Kindle ebook. And when businesses reopen, you'll be able to find it at Barnes & Noble booksellers and at Carillon Historical Park in Dayton. Until then, be safe, be well, and wash your hands. That's good advice anytime. Cheers!